Well, let's discuss this now, and we are joined by the University of Johannesburg's Center for African Diplomacy's Dr. Oscar van Heerden. And in studio we have the Progressive Zimbabwean Foundation's Tino Maclean. It's one of the groups that are calling for this summit to be moved from Zimbabwe. Let's understand this now. Tino, I want to start in studio. Why are you calling for the SADC summit to not be held in Zimbabwe? What are the reasons?
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm glad to be here. The reason why we are calling SADC not to be held in Zimbabwe, we want SADC to fix our problem first before they give to Mnangagwa. Mr. Mnangagwa, because they are giving Zimbabweans, they are not giving Mr. Mnangagwa. You know, like what happened to elections that took place last year. Even SADC, some report says like the elections were not free and fair elections. So how come they give Mr. Mnangagwa a chairmanship? We want them to fix it first before they give him chairmanship.
Do you believe that SADC leaders would listen to an organization or a group such as yourselves when you say Zimbabwe is not a free country, and therefore why hold a summit of this kind in that country? Because by doing so, you're legitimizing, as you say, the elections were disputed.
They might not listen to us, but now they have to listen to us concerned Zimbabweans, because we are the ones who are facing problems. If you go back situation back home, it's very, very tough. If you look at our hospital, we don't have medicine. And police are arresting people each and every day because they want to silence them. They don't want to say anything. So we call on SADC to interview and help us as Zimbabweans, because we are not happy, especially the way they are treating us in Zimbabwe. There is a police brutality everywhere. Yeah. So like even right now, situation, if I can tell you right now, for people to come to South Africa, it's very challenging the way they get here. They're ending up getting dangerous routes to reach South Africa, crossing through the Limpopo River without passport. It's not like they don't want to have passports. Passports fee are expensive, and they cannot manage to apply that passport. It's 5,000. That's why it's very, very sad. I see my sisters and my brothers, when they're getting to South Africa, they end up getting raped, getting killed, because they're looking for a better life somewhere outside Zimbabwe. So what we're calling on SADC, hear us, fix our problem first.
Dr. van Heerden, let's bring you into the conversation. Tino is a Zimbabwean. The group that he speaks on behalf of, they call themselves the Progressive Zimbabwean Foundation. Is this the right time, is this the right moment, perhaps I should say, for pressure groups to be in the streets of Zimbabwe during this summit and make a stand? And if that is the route they want to take, why should the regime in Zimbabwe see that as a problem or some kind of threat?
Yeah, you say good evening, Xoli. You know, I want to agree with Tino. This is the right time. Any civil society organizations, all Zimbabweans who feel the plight of the Zimbabwean people and who want to make the world aware of the repressive nature of the Zimbabwean government under ZANU-PF will wait for events such as this when there is a focus on the country and its government, in this case, Southern African Development Community, where all the presidents of SADC, 16 of them, will be making their way to Harare. As you know, currently the ministers of those governments are in Harare preparing for the heads of states meeting. So this is the opportune time to bring the crisis in Zimbabwe to the fore. You know, people are going to protest. They are going to want to demonstrate their anger, their frustration, their suffering under the ZANU-PF government. The reality is that the ZANU-PF government has demonstrated that they will continue becoming more and more repressive. And that's why, Polly, we've seen the various arrests of opposition politicians, we've seen the arrest of civil society activists, and just the general mayhem and intimidation that is meted out by the ZANU-PF government.
Why is it that the Zimbabwean leadership, Dr. van Heerden, why do they believe in force when you have such big events taking place in any other country, let me say in European countries? A G20 summit, you'll be told, is taking place and there are people on the streets. They are protesting about one or other reason. You don't see police using force. Well, in Zimbabwe, it's much more aggressive. There are alleged abductions. I'm going to use this word very, very forcefully, alleged, because we can't prove anything. We're sitting in South Africa. Yes, we're going to report about a summit in Zimbabwe, but we can't speak in definitive terms, except we hear from ordinary Zimbabweans who say people disappear in Zimbabwe without a trace if you stand up against the state. Why is it that the leadership in Zimbabwe behaves in this way?
Well, firstly, let me just say, Polly, it's a misnomer that these things don't happen in Europe. What tends to happen with the G7 and the G20 and the Davos gatherings where world leaders get together is that they put the perimeter of the venue, the perimeter fence, very, very far, sometimes kilometers away from where actual leaders will be meeting. And so protesters are very far from where they are meeting. That's where the skirmishes happen, the tear gas, and the so on and so forth. But I agree with you. Nothing necessarily to the extent where activists are disappearing, are being tortured, rights are being violated, and being released days later, and so on and so forth, which we have seen. There are confirmed cases in Zimbabwe where the authorities, the police, as Tino has indicated, has done so. So it's a very, very difficult situation to operate within. But I do want to say one thing, because I see, Tino is asking SADC to intervene, and there is ways that SADC can intervene. And as the DG of DIRCO here in South Africa has indicated, they will take this opportunity to obviously engage with Mnangagwa and his cabinet and his ministers to try and say that this is not the way you go about in terms of free speech, in terms of protest actions and so forth. But having said that, here is the conundrum, and this is the big problem. SADC leaders and SADC governments are anti or against external governments wanting to dictate how things must happen in your country. And we've seen this from the time when Robert Mugabe decided to have a policy on land grabs and taking farmers' lands and so forth and redistributing it. That was a cardinal sin. And since then, there has been international sanctions from European countries, from America and elsewhere. And the problem is, the challenge is that they are saying they are not going to stop these sanctions until there is a change of government. In other words, the ZANU-PF must get out of power, and there must be a democratic election, and the will of the people must reign supreme. But the problem is that they are the ones dictating it, and not the people of Zimbabwe.
Yeah. Tino, I want to ask you this question, but I'm prefacing it because we need to take a break. So you need to think about it a little bit. The leader of the EFF recently addressed a student gathering in one of the universities here in South Africa. And he was addressing students who are of Zimbabwean origin, saying that it is time to stand up to your government. I'd like for you to just think about that for a moment, and I want to hear your response to Julius Malema, whether he's right when he says it's only the people of Zimbabwe who can stand up and stand up successfully against a repressive government. Let's take a break. When we return, we continue the conversation. You're watching News at Prime. If you're just joining us, we are wrapping up a discussion around the SADC summit that is going to be held in Zimbabwe, but there is pressure to move this summit. If it's not going to be moved, then people should be allowed to voice their concerns about one or other reason they may have against their government. With me for this conversation, I'm still joined by the University of Johannesburg's Center for African Diplomacy, Dr. Oscar van Heerden, and in studio we've got the Progressive Zimbabwean Foundation's Tino Maclean. Tino, let's come to you now. You've had a couple of moments to think about what Julius Malema had to say, but let me also add to what he had to say. I want to quote Dr. Mike Chipere. He is an anthropologist affiliated with the Human Economy Program, which is housed at the University of Pretoria. He says, Zimbabwe is ripe for a revolution by the people, for the people. You think that that statement is similar to what Julius Malema had to say, that Zimbabweans, if you want change in your country, you've got to be the ones that lead it?
Yeah, I think it's the right time for us Zimbabweans to act if we really want freedom. We are here in South Africa. We think this is our country. No, we need to go back home and face the challenge that we have. Like South Africans fought. They did it in 1976. I think it's high time for us Zimbabweans to go home and do it in our home soil. You know, like, we don't want to march here in South Africa anymore. We have to take it to Zimbabwe. Like, I call on Zimbabweans. We do have Ndebele people and Shona people. We need to come together as Zimbabweans. Let's put our difference aside and fight for our country. If we don't fight for our country, no one will do it for us. It's highly time. It's highly time. I cannot tell how are we going to do it, but the time is now.
Why do you think it's taken for so long, though, to come to this decision, if indeed people like yourself are prepared now to go and confront the regime in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, I can say we have been cowards, but I think right now, we have to take it to our country. And what we demand, we don't want war. We want a better Zimbabwe for everyone. We want medicine in our hospital. We want clean water to our people. We want free education. That's what we want. We're not demanding war. If they don't gonna give us what we want, there is no another way. Zimbabwe streets are calling our names, and we will be there. If they kill us, they won't kill us all.
Do you think the elections are still a way to bring about change in Zimbabwe?
In Zimbabwe, election will never bring change, no matter how. They always rig. And if you go to Zimbabwe courts are captured. Courts are ZANU-PF. We cannot change anything. What we need to do as youth of Zimbabwe, we need to be in streets.
Dr. van Heerden, when you hear those words, that it's high time that the people of Zimbabwe do it for themselves, it's not me saying, but Tino says we've been cowards for a long time. The time is now to go and confront whatever it is that we need to do in our country for it to change for the better. Do you think it's possible?
Look, I mean, I think that that's the starting point of any revolution. It has to come from the ground. It has to be at home. It has to be by Zimbabweans. However, I do want to stress, and I think that Tino will agree with me, that revolutions are also assisted by countries around Zimbabwe. We cannot only blame the West for the challenges and the problems of Zimbabwe. Not at all. They have some role to play, of course, but we also have to take responsibility as South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and others. What is it that our governments are doing to assist the Zimbabwean people to make a success of that revolution? And so, as you earlier said with the DG of DERCO, Xoli, you know, quiet diplomacy has been around for a while, and indeed, diplomacy happens quietly. It doesn't happen on the rooftops. However, have we seen any successes of this quiet diplomacy?
Yeah.
What is it that the African government is doing to assist the situation in Zimbabwe? And it doesn't mean that you go and support the protesters on the street and you create chaos. But there needs to be a healthy dose of pressure placed on the ZANU-PF government to say that unless you continue on this draconian, repressive, hardline position at the expense of your citizens, the Zimbabweans, we cannot just stand by and allow it to happen where you have a situation, as Tino has said.
Yeah.
Many Zimbabweans, putting their lives in danger to actually come to South Africa illegally, and not just South Africa, but other SADC countries, in order to get away from the murderous, repressive state of Zimbabwe.
Can I get these last few words from you, Dr. van Heerden, before I come back to Tino? South Africa took a very bold step against the state of Israel. They said, we're taking you to the International Court of Justice because what you are doing in Gaza is genocide. Why is it that the South African government is unable to do that with the people of Zimbabwe, for the people of Zimbabwe? It's their neighbor. What happens there affects us here, because Tino and fellow nationals are in South Africa, not because they want to be here, because they also treated badly here. So why is it that there is this double standard?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's not so much double standards in the sense that we have to be clear, there is no genocide being perpetrated by ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe. However, there are certainly certain international laws and international rights that are being violated. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Zimbabweans have been displaced, have had to seek refuge in neighboring countries and further afield in the world. They are facing a repressive government. There has been a military coup, and so on and so forth. So there are all these indicators that suggest that SADC, because as the DJ has indicated, one of the things that they will concern themselves with at the SADC 44th conference is regional security. And I think that it would be a blatant lie if after this conference, SADC leaders tell us that there is no regional threat. Because the truth of the matter is the behavior and the execution of the Zimbabwean government under ZANU-PF has been a regional threat.
Yeah. Tino, last few words from you. The professor almost stole the words from me, because after this summit is done, would you want to hear that there is no regional threat to stability in the region? Or are you going to want to hear the truth from a government like South Africa, which has said, Israel, you are committing genocide in Palestine. Stop it.
Yes, that's what we want from President Ramaphosa, to intervene and help Zimbabweans. You know, like, I was not happy like what he did last year. After soon the results were announced, he went to Zimbabwe and congratulated Mr. Mnangagwa. Right now, here, we are causing problem here in South Africa. Look at the illegal immigrants. They are here, they are men. It's not like they want to be here. They are here because of the situation back home. So what we want, we don't want passports. What we want to go back to our country and work in our country and fix our problem there. You understand? That's what we want as Zimbabweans.
Tino Maclean, thank you very much for your time. Dr. Oscar van Heerden, I want to thank you as well for your contribution.